Okay guys, welcome back to module number 5. In module number 5, the title is very simple. It's all about mortgages. What is a mortgage? How is it registered? What are the priorities? You know, we hear first, second mortgage, third mortgage. So we're going to talk about what the mortgage is, priorities, the right. We're also going to talk about commercial versus residential mortgages. How do you get a commercial loan? Is it easier to get a commercial mortgage than a residential mortgage? What do they lend on? Okay, so in residential real estate, they lend based on you, the consumer. Could you afford to carry a mortgage or to pay for this mortgage? In commercial real estate, it's not that. They have to look at the property. Think about it. As a commercial lender, and if I look at you, Mr. Investor, and say, Mr. Investor, you're buying a $6 million mortgage property, or you have a $6 million mortgage, the mortgage payment is $42,000 a month. How could you afford this $42,000 mortgage a month on your job if you still have a job? Okay? So basically, in commercial real estate, lenders lend on the value of the property. I'm going to discuss that in the next section. And then you'll understand why it's simpler to buy a commercial building than two small residential. I'm going to show you that in this module. This is in module number 5. Talk to you soon, guys. You'll see me in the PowerPoint, or you'll hear me in the PowerPoint anyway.
Okay, everybody, we're back to module number 5, Understanding Mortgages. Why do I take a bit of time to explain to you mortgages here? Very simple is that most people have a certain fear of what is a mortgage, what's a VTB, what's a second mortgage, third position, fourth, fifth. Why do banks want or don't want to have a second mortgage, and how to sell it a bit to your banker or whoever you're dealing with. So I'm going to take some time here to explain how these mortgages work. And then you'll start to understand how you could play with wording in your contract, in your offers, or in obtaining your first, your second, and your third mortgages, and so on. So very simple. In this module, we will be discussing what is a mortgage, what's a first, second, third, mortgage priority and rights, what is a vendor take-back mortgage. We've discussed it a bit earlier, but we're still going to go touch it because it is so important to understand it. And why is financing easier on commercial than residential? So it is important to understand how mortgage work to put in place a VTB, a vendor take-back mortgage, which is an important factor to success in getting a no money down deal. So let me just mull through the material, and hopefully my explanation will be great for you guys. So the process, well, first of all, let's understand why, how is a mortgage registered, and what's you know, we say I'm going to go to the bank and apply for a mortgage. That's not how it works. So let me go step by step, and you'll understand, and promissory note and so on. So it starts basically with, I need money to buy a property. Could you lend me money, Mr. Banker? So basically, you don't go into the bank and say, I want a mortgage. You need money to buy a property to start with. And you say, Mr. Banker, I'd like to borrow some money because I want to buy a property. And in a sense, you say, well, and I promise I'll pay you back. In return for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write what's called a promissory note. I hereby promise that I'll pay you your mortgage back. But what happens is that it is a promissory note. I promise to pay. Promissory note. But you know what happens is that the lender looks at you, John Smith. You make $70,000, $100,000 a year, and you want to borrow $500,000 from them. So they're basically saying, I'm not really sure if you, just as a promissory note, if your signature and that promissory note that you're giving me, that you promise that I will be paying, is sufficient to cover the loan that I'm putting there. So the lender is unsure about the value of the promissory note, therefore he wants to secure it against an asset. Now it's to the choice of the lender if he wants to lend on the house that you want to buy, if he wants to lend on another house or whatever. Because technically you could go out and say, I want to buy a house, I'd like to borrow some money, I'll sign a promissory note, and you could actually, the bank might ask security, and you could actually secure that note against another property, another piece of land, or something else. So basically it's the banker that decides on which assets he wants to secure it against. Mind you, 95% of the time he will secure it against the property that you're buying. So what does that mean is that think about it. Let's say that you go out, you want to buy a sixplex. The banker looks at the property, says, I'm not too sure, I don't really like this area or something like that. Technically, you could turn around and say, Mr. Banker, I own a piece of land. It's paid full outright, beautiful, ocean view, whatever. If you want, I'll give you the right to register a mortgage against that property instead of the building that I'm buying. So basically, it's the lender that chooses which property he wants to secure the note against. Okay? Then what happens is that the financial institution will advise the lawyer to prepare a document to secure their promissory note. And that document is called a mortgage agreement. This is the document that you actually go to a lawyer, a notary public, and you sign. It is basically, I hereby promise to pay this amount of money, and I will pay it under these terms and conditions, and the security is the property that you are buying most of the time. So, we go from there. Then, the bank advises the lawyer to register a mortgage against a property, and it happens that this property is the one you're buying. They also advise a lawyer that they want to be the first position. So basically, they say to the bank, listen, the lawyer, I only want to be, the only position that I will accept is to be in first position. So the lawyer's job at that point is to make sure that all previous mortgages have been discharged. And listen to what I say here. All previous mortgages have been discharged, or they have agreed to be subordinated to the new mortgage that is being put in place. So I'm going to say this again. The bank will advise a lawyer that they want to be they want the first right of taking the property back if you default. They want to be in first position. The bank is secured by the property in the event that you default on your loan, promissory note, or mortgage. So they become in first position. Now, bear in mind, it is the lawyer's responsibility to ensure, first of all, that the bank is in first position and that there is no liens against the property that have not been discharged or subordinated. You follow what I'm saying here? So now there's something else about the lawyer. If the lawyer makes mistakes, it's his problem. And the banks will normally never accept to be in second position except if they are actually in first position already. So once in a while you'll see that you may have bought a property and you go to the, you bought a property 10 years ago, you have a mortgage on the property, and you go back to see the banker and say, Mr. Banker, I need money to do some renovation, or I'm buying a boat, I'm buying something, and what I'll do is I'll give you the right to register a mortgage on my house. Well, normally what would happen, they'd say, well, if you want me to register a mortgage on your house, I have to be in first position. But because it is the same financial institution that's in first and in second, they normally would be okay for them to be in second position, although basically they are in a combined first position. Once in a while, what these bankers will do is they'll want to blend both mortgages. So they'll say, well, the first is at 6%, the second is at 8%, so therefore we'll blend both mortgages and we'll make them a 7% mortgage for 3 years or whatever the duration of the mortgage that you have in place. So does that make sense for you guys? So you go to the bank, you want to borrow money. You sign a promissory note. The promissory note, the banker wants to be secured. It could be secured on the property that you're buying or any other asset where the banker will decide to secure its note on. They will advise a lawyer that they want the lawyer to register a mortgage in first position, and it's the lawyer's responsibility to make sure that the bank is in first position and all documentation is prepared accordingly. Okay? Now, from this, the mortgage is written. So what's a mortgage? A mortgage is a written document creates a lien on the property as security for the payment of a specified debt. So basically the document is a mortgage. Now, if you knew a bit of history in that, a mortgage basically means to be paid until death. That's what it means. And I don't know if some of you guys remember, but our parents that were very, very happy. They used to have mortgage burning parties, which meant that after a 25-year mortgage, they take the paper and they burn the mortgage. It was more a party than a real value. It just meant that I'm finally paying on my mortgage. Okay, so understanding that the bank wants to be in first position. Now let's go to second mortgage. So a second mortgage is also commonly called a second position mortgage, is created by a mortgage loan over the amount of the first mortgage. So when a vendor says, I will carry a mortgage, not even necessary, he doesn't know that he's actually in second position. Vendor agrees to carry a mortgage in the amount of $20,000 at 6% interest only. If the vendor signs that document, he expects to be on title as a mortgage. It happens that he's the second document registered on title. And the reason I say vendor agrees to carry a mortgage in the amount of is that I don't want to tell my vendor in which position he will be. Because for me, in obtaining my financing, I'm looking naturally to get as much financing as possible. Do we agree? So I'm going to go see my bank and say, Mr. Banker, my bank, my mortgage broker, can you get me a first mortgage as high as possible? Banker says, yes, I'll get you 75% loan to value. Then I'm going to go see my best friend and say, Denis, could you lend me $50,000? And then he says, Mark, I'm okay with that, but I want to register a mortgage against the property that you are buying, and I do want to be in second position. Okay, Denis, that's okay. I'm okay with that. So I'm going to get my first mortgage with the bank. Denis is going to come in and lend me the $50,000. But the vendor has also agreed to carry a mortgage. So suddenly the vendor may be in a third position depending on the way the lawyer will register the mortgages, in the timing that their mortgages will be registered. Because actually on the document itself it doesn't say first mortgage, second, third. It only says mortgage in favor of the bank, mortgage in favor of Denis, my best friend, mortgage in favor of the vendor. Well, actually in that case that vendor would be in third position. So when you ask for a mortgage and you say, Mr. Vendor, vendor agrees to carry a mortgage, and you say a mortgage, and in your clauses you also state that this offer is subject to the purchaser obtaining satisfactory financing at his sole and absolute discretion, it may also mean that you're looking for a first, a second, and he's going to be in third position, and that is the reason why you never stipulate in your offer the position of the vendor's mortgage. You always say vendor agrees to carry a mortgage in the amount of interest only. So created by a mortgage loan over the amount of the first mortgage, it's used to purchase or reduce the amount of cash down that you'll need in order to buy the property. We understand that. If a bank comes in, let's use $100,000 as a purchase price, the bank says I'll come in at 75%, you got $75,000. Normally you would need $25,000 in cash. If the vendor carries a $15,000 mortgage, that means that he's willing to hold a note. That means that you owe me $15,000. Well, he's in second position, so 75 bank, 15 for him. You only have to come in with $10,000. So we're now starting to see how we could be creative in positioning the mortgages or the financing. And you'll see that if you look at creative financing, I mean as a course, as a 3-day course, we start getting into how do you position the mortgage, the timing, the maturity, and the interest rate, and play with the blended rates and all that. But for now, just understand second position means that it's the second mortgage that is registered on title, but it's only a mortgage. So now, some people say, or some banks, first of all, some banks will say that you cannot have a second mortgage on the property. I've seen that with my bank in Canada once. They said, well, no, we don't allow you to have a second mortgage on the property. Well, what do you mean? Why should you care? you're still in first position. And that's what sort of gets me very upset with banks, is that they'll give you a letter of commitment and say, well, we'll lend you 75%, but you cannot have a second mortgage. So you say, well, why? Well, because we want you to put 25% down. Why should you care? Well, we want you to put 25% down. So you might say, okay, I'll put 25% down. You close on your property and you say, okay, I put 25% down. 2 weeks after, you go see your friend Denis and say, hey, Denis, I need some cash. Could you lend me some money? I'm buying another property. I'm buying a boat, whatever. Just, I'm buying something. And Denis says, well, Marc, sure, I'll lend you $15,000. But what I'll do is I'll register a mortgage on that property that you just bought 2 weeks ago. I'll register a second mortgage. And is this illegal? Well, I have a big challenge with that. Is it illegal? If the bank told you, yes, they don't want you to register a second mortgage, then it sort of is. But at the same time, why should they care? So now, I'm saying here, you could have as many mortgage on a property as you want and can secure. Some people say, well, you mean to tell me that we could get 100% mortgage on a property? Absolutely. You could get 110% financing on a property. The financing, you could get 100% financing, which means it would be 110% mortgage on a property. Absolutely. The only thing that would happen is that the person that is above the loan to value is really not secured by the property. But at least they could get the property back in the event that they feel like it. So if you follow what I'm saying here, if it makes sense. The mortgage position indicates its priority against collateral. So what we have here is that if the bank is in first position and you default on it, they have the first right to take the property back. So let's say that there is a first mortgage, we'll use the same example, $100,000. Fair market purchase price, the bank lends $75,000. Denis, my best friend, lend $15,000, and I put $10,000 down. So forget the vendor take back. I've got a first of $75,000, $15,000 from Denis, and I put $10,000 down. And 2 years go by, and I get in trouble, and I can't pay my first mortgage, nor can I pay Denis' mortgage. Well, the first thing that will happen is when the bank is not paid, they will pull title. They pull title on the property and they say, okay, we're secured, we're in first position. We notice that there's a second mortgagee, which is Denis, for an amount of $15,000, and there's Marc that bought the property and he has $10,000 in equity. So what we're going to do is we're going to send a letter to Marc and Denis advising them, both of them, that if the bank is not repaid or brought up to date, they will start foreclosure or power of sale procedures to get the property back, depending on which procedures they're entitled to. So Denis is going to get a letter. Says, well, Marc, you haven't paid the bank. And he said, well, Denis, I can't. So now Denis has a choice. If he lets it go like this, and if he says, well, you know what, Marc, you're a terrible friend, you should have paid it, and you should pay me. I say, well, I can't do it. And he says, well, then I'm not going to pay the bank, let the bank take the property back. He's losing his $15,000. Do we agree? But what happens is that Denis also has the option, in order to secure his equity in the property, to make the bank current. So meaning he's going to pay the bank, and he's going to start foreclosure process on me. So he's going to take the bank's rights to take the property from me. So in order to secure his share, his mortgage of $15,000, he might pay the bank $2,000 or $3,000, whatever the amount in arrears. He pays that out, then he's entitled to foreclose on the property because you are in default of the first and his second. And as soon as the second mortgagee makes the first mortgage current on your behalf, they are entitled by mortgage rights to foreclose on the property. So if you understand what that means that in a sense, if you think about it, a bank should be happy to have a second mortgagee, because it means that in the event of default, if I use the example that I just gave you, the bank $75,000, Denis $15,000, and Marc $10,000. Well, if I default, the bank, well, technically the bank had two people to run after. Do we agree? They'll send Denis a letter, and they will send me a letter. The first one who pays, they don't care as long as they're paid. So I don't understand bankers when they say we don't want you to have a second mortgage other than bureaucracy. And if you talk to your lender, if you get to a point where it's going to be your personal banker, and you do, and you get a letter from him saying, listen, I want you to, I don't want you to have a second mortgage. Try explaining it to them that way. Listen, John, Mr. Banker, why do you care, first of all, if there's a second mortgage? You're in first position, so you have the first right. Secondly, it's my best friend, it's my dad, it's my business partner that's in second position. And if I ever have challenges, my best friend still has a right to the property, and he's going to collect the equity on it, and so on. So you understand where you understand why I don't understand bankers when they say that they don't want a second mortgage. All known as subordinated liens or mortgage are further down the position, the less rights and priority. So that means that if you're in fifth position, you have less right than fourth, and fourth has less right than third, and third has less rights than second. So the further down the line you are, the less rights to the property, but you will also be the first one called on saying, hey, make the fourth position ready, make the third ready, make the first up to date. So that's basically the understanding of the mortgages, why it's important to understand priorities, why it doesn't matter who's on second position or third, and whose responsibility is it to pay back the first mortgage. Now, banks and subordinated mortgages. Common investors' pitfall. Bank will loan, but they don't want you to have any other mortgage on the property, even a second or third. I just talked about that. How do you negotiate this? Second and third position, loans, VTB. That's what I'm saying here, is a second position or a third position are beneficial to the bank. So I mean that's two mortgage holders that can pay your debt and take over the property. So again, I've just explained that. It's like, why wouldn't you accept that there's a second or third mortgage on this property, Mr. Vendor? It means that 2, 3, or 4 of us would be responsible to repay that mortgage. Okay, here's a quick example of a property, and if you look at it here, it's quite simple. Purchase price $100,000, first mortgage. If we do go $80,000, so an $80,000 first mortgage, 80% loan to value, which give you $240,000. You would normally need $60,000. Do we agree? So purchase price $300,000, $240,000 first, a second mortgage of $30,000, and you would require $30,000 down. Does that make sense for everybody? So in this case here, there is no VTB or secondary financing. Here we've got a VTB of $30,000. Now this could also be $300,000, $240,000 first, VTB of $60,000, no money down. Just having the vendor carry instead of 10%, 20% will make the whole difference in this world. Now, residential mortgages versus commercial mortgages. I've touched a bit about it previously. A residential mortgage is any properties up to 5 units, sometimes 6 depending on the lending institution. And what happens is that in residential mortgages, banks will lend on your personal financial information. So they lend on the strength of the borrower. What they do is they look at the property and say, yeah, I know you want to buy this investment property. I know there's rental income on it. I know that, I know all of that, but really I don't care about the property. If the property was vacant for a year, could you afford to carry it on your income? So listen to the question. So on residential, banks don't care about the income that is generated from the property. They just want to qualify the loan based on your income. And it's what's called total debt service ratio, gross debt service ratio. So this is the biggest challenge that we have. Imagine you're buying a property, the mortgage is $2,000, they add $2,000 in expenses to your own personal mortgage, your car, your credit card and all that, and then they say, well, based on your salary, you can't afford to do this. Some banks will actually take up to 50% of the rental income, and they will add this up to your personal income. And it's getting tougher and tougher and tougher to get these loans, but it is available and doable. And that's where it's tougher to get financing on a residential property than on commercial, because on commercial they don't look at your personal income, they have to look at the income that is generated from the property. So let's see what this next slide. So commercial real estate, commercial mortgage, any property 6 and above, and that includes about everything: strip mall, industrial, land. Well, land is a bit different, but commercial buildings, let's just say. And lending is based on the income and debt service of the property, and some financial institution will go up to 75, maybe 80% loan to value. And like I said, think about it. Let's say that you do earn $120,000 a year. So that's $10,000 a month, which is a very nice salary. So you earn $10,000 a month. You go out and you buy a $2 million property, and you want, or $3 million, and you want to get a $2 million mortgage on it. Well, a $2 million mortgage could cost about $12,000 to $14,000 a month. Well, if they were looking at you as the borrower and they weren't taking any income from the property, you definitely don't qualify for it. Do we agree? Because you're making 10 and your mortgage is 12 just on the property. So in commercial real estate, bank will actually lend on what the property generates. They lend on the net operating income, the NOI to debt service ratio. Is there enough net operating income after all that's being paid to pay the bank's mortgage? By the way, what does NOI stand for? Well, net operating income. So we talked about this. The NOI is the income from a property after operating expenses have been deducted. So the gross income minus vacancies, minus repairs, maintenance, management, insurance, taxes, all of the expenses equals NOI. So in this example, we have $100,000 in rent, minus maintenance, insurance, policy, property taxes, repairs and maintenance, $60,000. The NOI is $40,000. So what the bank wants to make sure is that they look at your property and say, this property generates $100,000, $60,000 in expense, and by the way, they will calculate their own expense. Even if you say, oh, Mr. Banker, you know what, I do my own repairs, I do my own maintenance, I do my own property management, this property is brand new, there's nothing. They don't care. They will actually look at their ratio and they will say, no, this property here, expenses should be X number of dollars, and that's what we're calculating, even if you are doing the repairs, the maintenance, the property management, you're cutting the grass. Why? It's because if you ever default, if you move, if they have to take the property back, when they're going to sell it, they're not going to get somebody to do those repairs and maintenance. And the manager will definitely not be the one going out there and cut the grass. So I'm saying, if we ever take the property back, and if we take the income minus all the expenses, and they will buff it up, they'll take 10% management, they'll take 10% repairs, they'll take all their numbers, and they'll say, is there enough net operating income to cover the mortgage? Now, in this case, if there was, let's say, I'll go back here, just give me a second. In this case, if there was $36,000 of mortgage payment, there would be $4,000 left. That means that they would have a cushion of about 8%. It would be a bit low, but it's still sort of doable. Okay, so that's the NOI to debt service ratio that commercial lenders want. And it varies, so I'm not giving you an exact number here. It varies on area, location, kind of property and everything. Bon. What is a debt service ratio? Well, also known as a debt service ratio coverage, so the SCR. It's a measurement of a property ability to generate enough income to cover the cost of its mortgage payment. Debt coverage ratio. Okay, debt service coverage ratio. Higher the ratio, the easier it is to get a loan. It's simple. Let me just get a color that's going to be easier for you guys to see, and I'll explain what I mean by this. Let's say that you have a property here. It's worth, there's $100,000 in income. 40,000 in expenses, 60,000 NOI. Okay, so that's a zero right there. You don't see it properly. So my NOI is this. If I have a debt service of 40,000, so 60,000 is my NOI. I have 40,000. That means that my ratio is what? It's almost 1.5. Do we agree? Well, at 1.5, that means that if the bank takes the property back, they'll have 20,000 to pay the mortgages. So banks are looking for a ratio of 1.2 to 1.35. And if a bank has a ratio of 1.35, that means that they have enough net operating income plus 35% basically profit for bad debt, disparate building and everything. I hope you guys understand that. And that's where it's easier to get a commercial mortgage. The property has to qualify for the loan, not you. And if the property's coverage ratio is higher, is what they want, 1.2 to 1.35, then banks have what? They're in first position, and there's enough cash to pay their mortgage. What should be the problem? What could be the problem? So that's why we say it's easier to get, I tell all my students, my investors, it's easier to get a commercial loan than a residential, because on commercial they look at the building. What does it generate? What's my debt coverage ratio? Here's the explanation of all this. So NOI divided by debt service, by total debt service equal net debt service ratio. Example, 50,000 on 40,000, 1.25. This means that the property generates 25% more revenue than required to cover its debt payment. Let's wrap up this module. We've covered here the mortgage process. How are they registered? The difference between the first, second, and third and their rights. What is considered residential versus commercial? So residential 4 or below, commercial 5 and above. Different lending criterias. The total debt service ratio, your personal total debt service ratio versus the NOI to debt coverage ratio. In Module 6, we're going to be talking about how to get the vendor to carry a mortgage. Secrets to getting that mortgage, how to sell a VTB to the vendor, and important terms and clauses to put in your mortgage in order to make sure that you are going to be ahead of the game. So that's going to be our Module 6. We're getting towards the very hot and juicy part of creative financing. We understand fair market value, mortgages, we understand appraisal, we understand the types of financing now with banks, mortgage brokers, commercial, residential, the fees, like I said, the appraised value, the economic value. Now we're going to get to how do I get a vendor to agree to carry a mortgage and how do I secure him. So this is what we have next, and I will see you in the next module.